Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome you to the first in our new series of Doha debates, coming to you from the Gulf state of Qatar and sponsored by the Qatar Foundation. Democracy in the Arab world, is it a work in progress, or has that work ground to a halt and been put aside for the foreseeable future? Are meaningful elections on their way? Is the press getting freer? Are the judiciary more independent? And how many Arabs have the right to change their government through the ballot box? Just some of the questions we hope to answer with our motion tonight. This House believes that progress towards democracy has halted in the Arab world. Well, speaking for that motion, Dr. Hamzawy, an Egyptian political scientist and senior associate at the Carnegie Endowment for Peace, a think tank based in the United States. Much of his work has focused on the way people take part in politics in the Arab world and the role of Islamist movements. With him is Mustafa Hamarneh, who's currently director and CEO of the media company Al-Mada and is a former director of the Jordanian Center for Strategic Studies. Last year, he became chairman of the Arab Reform Initiative, which encourages democratic change in the region. Speaking against the motion, Salah Al-Shaikhly, who was Iraq's ambassador to the UK from 2004 to 2007. His career in politics has spanned more than 50 years, during which time he served as Assistant Secretary General at the United Nations and helped set up the opposition movement, the Iraqi National Accord. Also against the motion, Chidiac, a Lebanese television presenter and journalist. She's received a number of awards for journalism and for defending free speech. In September 2005, she was the victim of a car bomb attack north of Beirut. But she's back now with her own television program, and we're delighted to welcome her to Doha tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel. So now let me first ask Hamzawy to speak for the motion, please.
Thank you very much, Tim. Good evening to everyone. I passionately believe that democracy progress has come to a halt in the Arab world, and I have four major arguments to make, which in fact document four facts which we see in most Arab countries. One, we haven't moved closer in most Arab society to a just distribution of political power. We still have a high concentration of political power. We haven't come closer to a rotation of power by democratic means. Tim noted it in his introductory remarks. Arab citizens, when they elect in a less free way than we see it in other countries. And when they elect freely, election results are not respected. Second fact, which documents why we haven't been moving ahead in terms of democratic progress, is the fact that we still lack checks and balances between different branches of government. When you look at Arab countries, we have overly dominant executive powers. We have very weak, vulnerable judiciaries and legislative institutions. Parliaments and judiciaries lack oversight powers, and when they have them in laws or constitutions, they are hardly practiced in reality. Third factor, when we look at Arab citizens and the question whether Arab citizens are enjoying more civil and political freedoms in 2008 as opposed to the 1980s and 1990s, and if we mean by civil and political liberties and rights, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of organization, the answer is a clear no. In most Arab countries, there are two exceptions, Iraq and Lebanon, but whatever liberties citizens in Iraq and Lebanon are enjoying are practiced in the context of failed or failing state institutions where rule of law is yet to be established, where we have governments that lack monopoly over the legitimate use of force. Final factor which I have, and final fact, when you look across the region from Morocco to Bahrain, when we take opposition forces and we ask ourselves a question whether they are mounting a real challenge to ruling establishments, whether they are generating enough pressures on ruling establishments to open up, to democratize, the answer is that opposition movements in the region, be it liberal or Islamist, NGOs or political parties, are weak, are vulnerable, and are being manipulated by ruling establishments.
Hamzawy, thank you very much indeed. You wrote last year, the rise of democracy is not confined to rhetoric, limited, but real changes are taking place. You wrote this. Are you sure you're on the right side of the debate?
I am.
You're arguing that they didn't take place now.
What I argued, and it's not only one piece of writing, but more than one piece, what I argued was and is, I would make the same argument today, Arab societies are changing. We are looking in many Arab countries at
greater pluralism. They've experimented with minor reform measures.
Minor reform measures is what I really mean. And minor
But that's a
reforms
start to democratization,
it's
isn't
not,
it?
because it's not adding up, it's
But
not
how else would it
accumulating.
look if it were starting? It would start with small steps.
Let me just clarify 2 points. One, major change is taking place in a societal sense. If you look at Gulf countries, non-Gulf countries, we are looking at impressive modernization processes which are taking place. We have great dynamic social spheres, economic spheres, but they are yet to impact on polities of the region. We have a great dynamism outside
Since
politics.
2000, you pointed out, first municipal elections in Saudi Arabia since the 60s. Women got the right to vote for and run professional associations.
Sure.
In Oman, people got the right to vote in 2003.
Sure.
In the UAE, there were first partial elections in 2006. If those aren't moves toward democracy, I don't know what is.
Well, those are moves in the direction of good governance. And we have to differentiate between what governance means, what good governance means, and what democracy really means.
But it has opened the space for greater pluralism, greater participation, and more opposition.
No one would doubt that we have a greater participation to an extent in the region. But,
and that isn't a hallmark of democracy?
Well, it's a step, but it's not accumulating, it's not adding up. Because
but you're arguing that it's halted, and now you're telling me there's steps.
Because we have countries which have been backsliding on democratic progress. If you look at Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, we have clearly a regression.
Thank you very much indeed. Sure. Thank you. Could I now ask, please, Salah Al-Shaikhly to speak against the motion?
Thank you. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, may I start by saying I am against this motion. To claim, and this is what the motion is saying, that the process has come to an end on the strength of just a few anecdotes is to banish democracy into oblivion and to discard you as an upcoming, new, vibrant Arab generation, which, of course, you will have the leadership over the years to come. Many Arab nations have enjoyed the relative freedom to organize themselves into political parties, associations, trade unions, and NGOs. In fact, a study not long ago have found over 50,000 such organizations in the Arab world. In many countries, media has been relatively free to monitor and criticize government, Egypt, Kuwait, Iraq, Lebanon. The judicial system and the practice of the judiciary has been monitored by human rights organizations. Therefore, they cannot really do very much. International pressure has been mounting, and many Arab rulers are really weary of any blatant violation of human rights and the process of democracy. Elections and parliamentary system has become the accepted norm. The Iraq experience of the past few years, although not brilliant, although not perfect, I think it has been very, very encouraging. Mr. Chairman, I believe that the rumors about the death of democracy in the Arab world is highly exaggerated. Thank you.
Salah Al-Shaikhly, thank you very much indeed. If, as you say, democracy is marching on in the Arab world, how many Arabs now stand the chance of voting out their leaders?
They can, when given the due process.
Where? Tell me which is the first Arab leader who's going to be voted out of power.
Let's wait to see what happens in Iraq in the end of 2009. I can assure you, although, I don't want to look at the
But if you're telling me
crystal...
that democracy is progressing in the Arab world, you can't point to a single leader who's going to be voted out of office.
The process in Egypt, for example, President Mubarak, actually, he went down to the street, he campaigned, he only got 76%. Now, this is progress when he used to get 99%.
But you know perfectly well he's not going to be voted out of office, is he? Salah Al-Shaikhly, he's not going to be voted out of office. The Al Saud are not going to be voted out of office.
You don't know
in Saudi Arabia.
You don't know. Once we can rile up our Arab youth to take part, not to feel the apathy that we have in many Arab countries, we encourage them.
But Egypt is under emergency law. It's been under emergency law for decades.
I know. Look.
In Saudi Arabia, you call for constitutional monarchy, you're jailed.
We have kingdoms, which we cannot change. We have prime ministers. And definitely, look at Jordan. Every few days, we have a new prime minister.
Are you saying suddenly Jordan is democratic?
I think